The world is still wondering, where is Jamal Khashoggi? He vanished after walking into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, and he never came out. Turkish officials accused Saudi Arabia of killing the journalist, and since then, there has been mounting pressure for the U.S. Treasury Secretary to cancel his upcoming trip to Saudi Arabia. Listen to U.S. Senator Marco Rubio.
You're suggesting that Mnuchin should not go to the economic conference in Riyadh? Is that what that means?
I don't think he should go. I don't think any of our government officials should be going and pretending as it's business as usual until we know exactly what's happened here.
Already, these sponsors and speakers have pulled out of the Davos in the Desert conference, including CNN. And right now, Saudi Arabia is becoming more isolated as it vows to retaliate against any sanctions with even greater action after President Trump had this message.
There's a lot at stake, and maybe especially so because this man was a reporter. There's something, you'll be surprised to hear me say that, there's something really terrible and disgusting about that if that were the case. So we're going to have to see. We're going to get to the bottom of it, and there will be severe punishment.
One Saudi media general manager warning President Trump today, any sanctions from the United States will, I'm quoting now, stab its own economy to death, end quote. CNN's global affairs correspondent Elise Labott joining me right now. So what might the next move be for the U.S.?
Well, Fred, I think that they're really having a lot of meetings right now between U.S. officials about what they're going to do when they have some more information. Right now, they don't have any information from the Saudis, nothing from the Turks, because, you know, the U.S. has been very busy trying to be focused on getting Pastor Andrew Brunson out. Everyone's going back to work tomorrow. I think they're going to expect a lot more answers. But right now, Saudi Arabia really, as you said, pushing back on the notion that they were involved. The Saudis came out this morning, you know, with a very strong message in the state media. And then the head of Al Arabiya, which is a Saudi-owned Arab channel, the general manager, put out a tweet today that said, the truth is, if Washington imposes sanctions on Riyadh, it will stab its own economy to death, even though it thinks that it is stabbing only Riyadh. Some short, sharp words there, Fred, from a real someone very close to the Saudi royal family. But even then, the Saudis now seem to be walking that back. Turkey very shortly after tweeted that that was his own personal opinion. And then the Saudi embassy came out with a very curious statement, a tweet that said, to help clarify recently issued Saudi statement, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia extends its appreciation to all, including the U.S. administration, for refraining from jumping to conclusions on the ongoing investigation. Fred, so a lot going on here in Washington, but also in Saudi Arabia as they try to come to some strategy in terms of how to explain what happened to Jamal.
All right, Elise Labott, thanks so much. U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin is still planning to go to the Davos in the Desert conference in Saudi Arabia. Listen to Trump's top economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, explain why.
It's actually a conference about terrorist financing and how to stop it. So it's a very important subject. Regarding Secretary Mnuchin, spoke to him last evening. At the moment, he is intending to go because of the importance of the issue of ending terrorist financing. But again, along with the president and the general investigation, Mr. Mnuchin will make up his mind as the week progresses.
All right, CNN's White House correspondent Boris Sanchez joining us live now. So what's the reaction you're hearing from Washington, particularly as that conference, many are of the thinking that it's really about, you know, the building of economic enterprise and technology?
That's right, Fred. Well, there's a bit of a disagreement between the White House and Congress as to how the disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi should be handled. Here at the White House, the president has not explicitly blamed Saudi Arabia. He really hasn't pointed the finger in their direction. He has said that the White House is going to get to the bottom of what happened to the Washington Post columnist. He did say yesterday that he would be having a call with King Salman of Saudi Arabia within the next 24 hours. It's almost been 24 hours. We haven't gotten any indication from the White House that that call has actually taken place. The president has also chafed at the suggestion by some senators that Congress should get involved, specifically by potentially blocking a $100 billion arms deal that the administration made with Saudi Arabia shortly after President Trump took office. That is something the president has said would likely hurt the U.S. more than it would hurt Saudi Arabia. But this is a rare point of agreement for some senators. I want you to listen to what Marco Rubio and Bernie Sanders said about this on some of the Sunday morning talk shows.
I believe the Trump administration will do something. The president has said that. But if he doesn't, Congress will. That I can tell you with 100% certainty, with almost full unanimity across the board, Republicans and Democrats. There will be a very strong congressional response if, in fact, the Saudis lured him into that consulate, murdered him, cut up his body, and disposed of it. There was going to be a very strong congressional response.
I think that it's clear. We cannot have an ally who murders in cold blood in their own consulate a critic, a dissident. That is unacceptable. I think one of the strong things that we can do is not only stop military sales, not only put sanctions on Saudi Arabia, but most importantly, get out of this terrible, terrible war in Yemen led by the Saudis.
Now, this hesitation or lack of a strong response from the White House when it comes to the disappearance of this journalist could be seen as an indication as to just how much this administration has staked on the future of the Mideast, being involved with Saudi Arabia's crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman. Fred, he is a close ally of President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and so there may be something to be read in this hesitation to go after the Saudi Arabian kingdom for the disappearance of this journalist, Fred.
Right, and the president made it pretty clear yesterday from the Oval Office that, he worked really hard on that $100 billion, military, order, arms order, and he doesn't want to back off of that. All right, Boris Sanchez, thank you so much. All right, Elise Labott is back with me now. Also with me, CNN senior international correspondent Arwa Damon, who is outside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, where Khashoggi was last seen. So, Arwa, how aggressively does it appear that Turkish investigators are, getting any new evidence, getting any more information, even though they haven't been in the consulate yet?
I think it's safe to assume that they're pursuing this as aggressively as they can, bearing in mind that point that you make there. Crucially, they have not been able to get into the consulate or the consul general's home. Remember, they had originally asked for access. It was granted to them by the Saudis. The Saudis then asked them to postpone. Over the weekend, we had the formation of this so-called joint working group. A delegation arrived from Saudi Arabia, but we haven't seen any conclusions coming out of it. And we have also heard from Turkey, from the foreign minister, where he said Saudi is not cooperating, at least not to the extent that Turkey would like to see, because they do really want access to these crucial buildings, the consulate as well as the consul general's home. And I think there's a fair level of frustration among the Turkish authorities and the Turkish government because of this, and because they really do want to see this resolved. This is not a crisis that Turkey was anticipating, nor is it one that it is necessarily very well prepared for, given all of the various different political and potentially global implications this is going to perhaps have.
And then, Arwa, that the U.S. and that the president isn't saying anything definitively about, whether Saudi Arabia may be responsible, but, they want the investigation to play out. At the same time, they're entertaining a number of options, severe punishment if it turns out that Saudi Arabia was involved. Does that send a particular signal, to Saudi Arabia, despite the fact that the U.S. has embarked on a rather cozy relationship with that country?
All of these various different dynamics have been quite interesting. We did hear earlier in the day some pretty harsh rhetoric coming out from the Saudi side, the Saudi National News Agency saying that if the U.S. were to sanction Saudi Arabia, they would respond not in kind, but with even greater intensity. We then had this op-ed that was penned by the general manager of Al Arabiya, who was basically warning the world and reminding the world of the power that Saudi Arabia has, saying that he could basically bring the U.S. economy to its knees. They could force oil prices up significantly. He has since then come out and been quite specific in trying to say those were his views personally. And we also heard various tweets coming out of the Saudi embassy in Washington, perhaps an attempt on their part to do some damage control. A senior advisor there tweeting that, again, this op-ed was simply the views of this one one individual, not necessarily the position of the government. Turkey has really, to a certain degree, been wanting and hoping, I think, to see more international support, more support from the United States than it has seen at this stage, because this is also taking on a regional and global dimension to it. We have various different Arab nations now coming out showing their support for Saudi Arabia, and by that basically saying that they do believe the Saudi government's statement that they had nothing to do with Khashoggi's disappearance. But of course, when it comes to certain facts that we cannot deny, and that is that Khashoggi went inside the consulate and never appeared again, nor is there any sort of footage, CCTV footage of him coming out of that. You know, Turkey's really finding itself in a very tricky situation.